What is this really about? That's the question that I suggest you ask yourself when something's bugging you or when you've had an interaction perhaps that you had a reaction to. Even if you think you know for sure, ask yourself that question. What is this really about? Hey everyone, I'm Sonia, and on this channel, I give you tips and strategies to live your most fulfilling life. So this could really be a part 2 in a way to a recent video that I did on the body and having the body as an ally. In that video, I spoke about noticing, in your body reactions in order to get some information and to process through emotions. But as part of that, I mentioned the potential information you could get from your body when you're having a reaction. And so a second step to that could be, once you've noticed what the reaction was, going further with it and trying to figure out what the reaction's really about. So whether you are figuring out that there's something bugging you because you felt it in your body and you were examining it that way, or whether it's just that you realize that you are, let's say, frustrated or angry or feeling like you are having thoughts about someone who you had an interaction with or about a particular situation and you just notice it's really bothering you. However you come to it, this video is about some of the things to think about, some aspects to think about when asking yourself that next question, which should be, what is this really about? So to start with, my suggestion is to maybe take a deep breath first, because this is harder than you think sometimes to go with if you feel like you especially know already why you're having a particular reaction. It's this idea of trying to get around that stubborn feel when something bugs you, get around those patterns and those beliefs that you've already had around it by simply trying to accept that there could be multiple possibilities for why it's true. Or like maybe it's even more helpful to think of it as multiple aspects to it. So maybe you don't have to say, I'm totally wrong in how I've been thinking about it, but there could be something else going on here too. So if you can try to take that foundational view and lens going into this process, that's going to be very, very helpful. And another foundation is to allow it to unfold over time. So sometimes we get, epiphanies quickly about things, and that's the main thrust of what we're going to learn that may be different from what we previously thought. But a lot of times this is going to be an unfolding, possibly even over multiple times that we react, right? We might learn a little more each time, especially as our view of it starts to change or expand more. So both immediately as you're able to reflect on what happened and why you're reacting, and at later points as well, to add that time element into it and things that might open up over time in terms of our perspective on it. I want you to really notice what your inner voice is telling you. What's your inner voice telling you? Are you having any memories or associations coming up? And you want to just catch these. So sometimes we think we're not having anything like this because it's not coming through so clearly in words, or honestly, I think sometimes it's just that we're so used to the words in the back of our head, going, that we sort of aren't really paying attention. They don't feel like the very forefront of our mind, but they're still there. So you want to notice that. Notice if you had a memory come up. Notice if you had an association come up. Notice if you're having any particular thoughts. So for example, if you were just having a interaction with someone that you didn't like, what are you thinking about them? What are you telling yourself about them or about the relationship? And what's really important to do once you notice this is to write it down. So this could be in, actually journaling about it, but it doesn't have to be. I just want to make sure you note it, and note it pretty quickly, like as soon as you can, because they really do submerge back right away. You think you'll remember. It's almost like, I feel like it's almost similar to when, you have a dream and you remember it when you first wake up, and then, unless you write it down or something very strongly reminds you of it, it's gone. So they can submerge again. It can submerge again, and you won't necessarily remember what you thought of. And so it's very important to write it down. And when you go into some reflection about it, which would be a step to do also, you can just sit with it and think about it, and then maybe jot a few notes about it. You can full on journal if you're the type of person who likes to do that. Or, if you prefer processing orally, you might want to talk about it with a trusted friend. Ideally, it'd be maybe a coach or therapist, simply because of their training. And so they're able to hold what you're telling them properly. But sometimes, with certain friends, hopefully you have a sense of who is the right person for that. It can work out to talk with a friend about it too. And my suggestion would be, if you're talking about it with that friend, and if it's more about oral processing and sort of bouncing things off of them, that you're just clear with them when you do that. So to let them know if you don't want advice, for example, and if you just are trying to talk something through and get clear on what's happening with you. So as you start to do, so that's kind of the process for one particular case of reaction, or perhaps a few. Over time, what's going to happen is you're going to start to see some patterns. You might start to see that you always have the same thoughts about a particular person or a particular kind of situation, and you're going to start to notice those. And so sometimes it can be helpful to, label that. Sometimes not, but sometimes it can be helpful to sort of notice it in a certain way that it's helpful to put words to. Like you might say, oh, I can see I'm acting with my lens that's unable to see when someone is being positive with me, unable to receive or unable to see the positive, or whatever that is for you, you can hopefully notice some of those patterns. And I think this is a good time to bring up as you're hopefully noticing something that is around your own patterns, or a memory that always comes up and you realize you're reliving the past, for example, because that can happen a lot. Like, oh, I'm reacting to this person like I react to my father or to my mother. And, that's not really the full truth of the situation. So when you start to understand some of that stuff, it's perfectly valid to also then take into account what you genuinely didn't like about that actual situation that happened. So I'm not trying at all to say here that you're only reliving the past. That can happen sometimes, but usually there's still something you didn't like about that situation. And so if you can start to get clear on that, that's really important. And it's going to be especially important for the next step, which is, in a lot of cases, you will want to actually go back into the situation. If it's, if it was an interaction with someone you deal with frequently, like an intimate partner, of course, this is going to happen anyway. But you may want to delve back into that particular situation or that particular topic, or an interaction with that particular person, in order to test out and sort of see, when I have this different lens now, that has more to it. Even if there was something I didn't like initially, there's more to it now because I can see where my initial reaction was. You can see how that goes differently when you're recognizing your own triggers or your own reactions and where those are coming from. Now, like I said, you are likely to potentially have some aspect of it that you didn't like as well. And so you can certainly now address that too. And the fantastic news here is that because you've gotten more clear on what parts were about your own reaction or trigger and what parts don't have to be about that, you're going to be much more clear and centered, and regulated in terms of asking for what you do need to be different. So let's say you didn't like a particular thing that your partner said, because it triggers you. Well, there could be an aspect of that that's purely trigger, and you might decide that noticing it makes it you not bothered by it anymore. But then you may still feel like, I still do feel like I want a little more respect in tone from this person, even though what they said triggered something else in me. And so you still could ask for that, like, hey, when you use that tone, that really doesn't feel respectful to me. And it's important to feel, that I feel that you're respecting me and how you're talking to me. So you could still bring up something very specific like that. Or you could also use that as an opportunity to let the person know that it's something that triggers you. So maybe you don't want them to say that particular thing to you at all. And even if it's about a trigger that doesn't really have to do with them, you are allowed to ask for that. You can say to them, could you not, say this particular thing, because that's something that just personally is as upsetting to me, even if you're not intending to upset me, for example. And, if it's with someone who's more close to you, like an intimate partner, someone like that, you can actually maybe share a little bit more about your personal journey with it. And that's a fantastic way to have more vulnerability in the relationship and to become closer. So, in some situations that won't be necessary because it's not someone that you're close to in that way. And it's more just about getting really clear in terms of what you're asking for and how you're interacting with the person. And a quick caveat here, of course, this isn't going to always be necessary. Sometimes you can just get insight into a reaction that you've had and then just take it going forward for whatever is going to come up in your life in terms of interactions or situations. So you don't have to force yourself. Please don't feel like you have to force yourself to go back into a particular situation. And especially if you feel like there was toxicity to it that you don't even want to deal with, you do not need to do that. This is for situations where you feel like you can work with your new perspective in order to make things better and better for you in situations and interactions that you want to have. Okay, so hopefully that was helpful as a somewhat stepwise process for what to do when you realize that you're having a particular reaction. You're going to ask yourself this overall question: what is this really about? Not meaning that what you think it's about is not included, but knowing that it can be much more expanded than that potentially. And then you're going to really see what it is you're thinking and what associations and reactions and memories are coming up. You're going to note those, and then you're going to have a chance to reflect on them. You're going to look at patterns over time. And then in some cases, you're going to use that information to go into a particular situation or interaction with much more clarity around what you want and need. And then in cases where you don't do that, you're simply going to use it going forward so that you can have a lot more clarity in your interactions. So hopefully this was helpful. Let me know in the comments if you would like any more clarifications or if you have another topic that you'd like me to cover.